June 14th, 2024. Some dates carry a strange kind of weight long before anything happens. You wake up feeling it, even if you can't explain why. That morning, I stood alone in my kitchen with a chipped ceramic coffee mug warming my hands, watching the first rays of sunlight spill across our backyard. The maple tree Eleanor and I planted the summer after Claire was born swayed gently in the breeze. 50 years ago, we'd planted that tree because we wanted something to grow alongside our marriage. Now it towered over the house. Our marriage had survived wars on the evening news, layoffs, recessions, raising children, buried dreams, and more sleepless nights than I could count. But cancer had tested us in ways nothing else ever had. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. I'd repaired that clock 3 different times over the years, replacing springs, sanding tiny gears, refusing to let it stop. Eleanor used to joke that I treated broken things better than I treated myself. Maybe she was right. I took another sip of coffee that had already gone cold and looked toward the dining room table. A small blue gift box sat there. Nothing expensive. Just a silver locket I'd found in a little antique shop 2 towns over after weeks of secretly setting aside $20 here and $30 there from my paychecks at the hardware store. Inside it, I'd placed 2 photographs. One from our wedding day. The other from last Christmas. In the first picture, we looked impossibly young. In the second, older, thinner, a little more tired. But still looking at each other exactly the same way. That mattered more than wrinkles ever could. Behind me, I heard the bedroom door creak open. Slowly. Painfully. Every sound Eleanor made these days seemed to come with effort. I turned just as she appeared in the hallway wearing her pale green robe. For a moment, my heart broke all over again. June 14th, 2024. Some dates carry a strange kind of weight long before anything happens. You wake up feeling it, even if you can't explain why. That morning, I stood alone in my kitchen with a chipped ceramic coffee mug warming my hands, watching the first rays of sunlight spill across our backyard. The maple tree Eleanor and I planted the summer after Claire was born swayed gently in the breeze. 50 years ago, we'd planted that tree because we wanted something to grow alongside our marriage. Now it towered over the house. Our marriage had survived wars on the evening news, layoffs, recessions, raising children, buried dreams, and more sleepless nights than I could count. But cancer had tested us in ways nothing else ever had. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. I'd repaired that clock 3 different times over the years, replacing springs, sanding tiny gears, refusing to let it stop. Eleanor used to joke that I treated broken things better than I treated myself. Maybe she was right. I took another sip of coffee that had already gone cold and looked toward the dining room table. A small blue gift box sat there. Nothing expensive. Just a silver locket I'd found in a little antique shop 2 towns over after weeks of secretly setting aside $20 here and $30 there from my paychecks at the hardware store. Inside it, I'd placed 2 photographs. One from our wedding day. The other from last Christmas. In the first picture, we looked impossibly young. In the second, older, thinner, a little more tired. But still looking at each other exactly the same way. That mattered more than wrinkles ever could. Behind me, I heard the bedroom door creak open. Slowly. Painfully. Every sound Eleanor made these days seemed to come with effort. I turned just as she appeared in the hallway wearing her pale green robe. For a moment, my heart broke all over again. "You've been fixing things your whole life." Her fingers traced the old scar running across my left palm. A thick white line that stretched from the base of my thumb nearly to my wrist. "You even tried fixing yourself." I glanced down at the scar. 32 years earlier, a steel beam had slipped during a construction job. One of the younger workers froze. I didn't. Sometimes bravery is nothing more than moving before fear catches up. I'd pulled him clear. The beam crushed my hand instead. Months of surgeries followed. Physical therapy. Pain. The doctors told me I'd never regain full strength. They were wrong. Mostly. I never told Eleanor just how much it still hurt during cold weather. Some burdens weren't worth sharing. She kissed the scar gently. You've carried this family your whole life. I wasn't carrying it. No? We were. She smiled. There you go again. What? Still refusing to take credit. I looked away. Truth was, lately, I felt like I hadn't carried much of anything. The savings were gone. The retirement account we'd spent 40 years building had disappeared in less than 18 months. Every envelope arriving in the mailbox made my stomach tighten. Insurance notices. Hospital statements. Pharmacy invoices. Second mortgage payments. Each one demanding money we no longer had. After Eleanor wandered into the living room to rest, I quietly opened the kitchen drawer beneath the phone. Most people would have thought it held takeout menus. Instead, it held our reality. Final notices. Past due balances. Prescription receipts. Collection letters. One bright red envelope sat on top. Payment required immediately. I didn't open it. I already knew what it said. Instead, I reached behind the stack and carefully pulled out a thick manila envelope. Unlike the others, this one wasn't filled with debt. It was filled with memories. Bank statements. Cancelled checks. Loan documents. Old receipts. Letters. Photographs. Printed emails. Even after collecting everything, I still wasn't sure why I'd done it. Maybe I needed proof. Proof that we hadn't imagined sacrificing everything. Proof that love had actually looked the way we remembered it. Or maybe some part of me already knew this anniversary wouldn't unfold the way I'd been pretending it would. I stared at the envelope for several long seconds, then slipped it into the inside pocket of my old navy sport coat. Just in case. Not because I planned to use it. Because something deep inside me whispered that tonight I might have no choice. Across the room, Eleanor called my name. Harold? Yeah? Will Claire be there on time? There it was. Hope. Even now. Even after months of cancelled visits. Short phone calls. Missed appointments. Forgotten promises. She still believed our daughter would show up smiling. I forced one of my own. I'm sure she will. Eleanor looked out the front window toward the driveway. You know. What? I have a feeling tonight's going to change something. I smiled because she couldn't see the fear on my face. I hope you're right. But as I watched the grandfather clock tick toward another hour, I couldn't shake the feeling that some anniversaries weren't meant to celebrate the past. They were meant to confront it. And by the time the sun disappeared behind the river that evening, 50 years of quiet sacrifice would finally demand to be heard. By the time we left for the restaurant that evening, my mind had already drifted backward more times than forward. Funny how memory works. It doesn't arrive in order. It comes in flashes. A laugh you haven't heard in years. The smell of fresh cut grass. The sound of little shoes running down a hallway. A tiny hand reaching for yours without hesitation. For me, every time I looked at Claire, no matter how old she became, I still saw the little girl who believed her father could fix anything. There was a time when she thought I hung the moon. Sometimes I wondered exactly when that changed. Maybe it doesn't happen all at once. Maybe love doesn't disappear. Maybe it just gets buried under years of ambition, stress, and distractions until even the person carrying it forgets it's still there. Claire was born on a rainy October morning in 1977. The doctor placed her in Eleanor's arms first. She was so small I honestly wondered how someone so tiny could survive in such a loud, complicated world. Then the nurse handed her to me. I froze. Not because I was afraid of dropping her. Because suddenly everything I'd worried about before that moment seemed meaningless. The overdue truck payment. The leaking roof. The extra shifts at the mill. None of it mattered anymore. There was only one thing left to do. Protect her. Forever. I remember whispering one sentence into her tiny ear while Eleanor slept. I'll never let life hurt you if I can help it. It was the first promise I ever made my daughter. I meant every word. Life, however, had other plans. Money was always tight. Not desperate. Just tight enough that every dollar had a job before it even entered the house. Eleanor clipped coupons every Sunday afternoon. She could stretch a pot roast into 3 different dinners. She patched clothes so carefully you couldn't tell where the original fabric ended and the repair began. When Claire wanted ballet lessons at 6 years old, we couldn't really afford them. So I volunteered to repair the studio's broken shelving on weekends. The owner never charged us tuition again. Claire never knew. She just thought kindness happened naturally. We wanted her to believe the world worked that way. Every Friday after work, no matter how exhausted I was, I'd stop by Miller's Ice Cream on the edge of town. 1 chocolate cone. 1 vanilla. We'd sit on the curb outside because there weren't enough benches. She'd tell me everything. Who got in trouble at school. Which teacher she liked. Who she thought had a crush on whom. Problems that seemed enormous when you were 8 years old. I listened like every story was the most important conversation in the world. Because to her, it was. Years later, I realized something. Children don't remember expensive vacations nearly as much as they remember whether you listened. One autumn afternoon, when Claire was about 9, we planted tulip bulbs beside the front porch. She dug crooked little holes while I quietly fixed each one after she'd moved to the next. She noticed anyway. Dad? What? You keep making mine better. I'm helping. No. She crossed her little arms. You're making them yours. I laughed. You caught me. She gently pushed my hand away. I want them to grow because I planted them. So I stepped back. Even though I knew half the bulbs were too shallow. The next spring, some flowers bloomed. Some didn't. Claire looked disappointed. I expected tears. Instead, she smiled. We'll do better next year. Children have a remarkable way of forgiving failure. Adults, not so much. By middle school, Claire had discovered books. She devoured them. History. Science. Mysteries. Anything she could find. The librarians knew her by name. Sometimes I'd pick her up after work and find her curled into a window seat with 3 books already stacked beside her. You ready to go home? 5 more minutes? Those 5 minutes usually became 30. I never minded. One evening, while driving home with the windows down, she looked over and asked, Dad? Yeah? Were you ever going to college? The question caught me off guard. I wanted to. What happened? My dad got sick. So you quit? I postponed. When are you going back? I smiled at the innocence of the question. I think that ship sailed. She looked out the window for a while before saying something I'll never forget. Then I'll go for both of us. I reached across the truck and squeezed her shoulder. You'll go farther than I ever could. That became my dream. Not mine anymore. Hers. High school brought new expenses. Band uniforms. Class trips. Yearbooks. Driver's education. Prom. Every time another fee appeared, Eleanor and I looked at each other the same way. Then we'd quietly figure it out. Sometimes that meant I worked Saturdays. Sometimes Eleanor picked up extra cafeteria shifts during summer school. Sometimes we simply did without. One winter, my work boots finally split open. Snow leaked inside every morning. Eleanor begged me to buy new ones. Instead, I wrapped the soles in duct tape. The boots lasted another 3 months. Claire never noticed. Neither did I want her to. She had debate tournaments to attend. Those mattered more. Her senior year arrived faster than either of us expected. Acceptance letters began arriving in thick envelopes. Each one represented another possibility. Another future. Then came the one she dreamed about. The University of Michigan. She burst through the front door waving the envelope over her head. I got in! Eleanor cried before even reading it. I picked Claire up and spun her around the kitchen exactly like I used to when she was 5. She laughed so hard she almost dropped the letter. That night we celebrated with homemade lasagna. Nothing fancy. Just happiness. Then, after Claire went to bed, reality sat down at the kitchen table with us. I unfolded the tuition estimate. Neither of us spoke. The numbers were staggering. Finally, Eleanor whispered, "We'll figure it out." I stared at the paper. "How?" "We always do." That became our marriage in one sentence. We always do. The next 18 months blurred together. Double shifts. Weekend overtime. Night maintenance jobs. I repaired neighbors' fences. Installed ceiling fans. Painted garages. Anything that paid. Eleanor sold homemade quilts at church fairs. She stopped buying new clothes altogether. Even our anniversary gift that year was a shared slice of pie at the local diner. Neither of us complained. Every dollar that entered our lives seemed destined for one place: Claire's future. Sometimes I'd leave before sunrise and return after she'd gone to bed. But every Sunday afternoon, without fail, we'd sit on the back porch together. She'd tell me about chemistry class, scholarship applications, dreams of becoming the first person in our family to earn a degree. One afternoon she looked at my rough hands. "Dad?" "When I graduate." "You will." She smiled. "When I graduate, you'll never have to work this hard again." I chuckled. "I'll hold you to that." She became serious. "No." She wrapped both hands around mine. "I mean it. When Mom and you get old." She paused, searching for the right words. "I'll take care of both of you." It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't dramatic. It was just something a loving daughter believed with her whole heart. I believed it too. Maybe that's why it hurt so much years later. Not because promises get broken. Because, at the time they're made, everyone honestly believes they'll keep them. The evening before Claire left for college, Eleanor stood in her bedroom folding the last few shirts into a suitcase. I watched from the doorway. Our daughter was excited. Nervous. Ready to see the world. When she finally zipped the suitcase shut, she suddenly threw her arms around us both. "I couldn't have done this without you." Eleanor kissed her forehead. "You already have." As Claire pulled away, she looked at us with tears in her eyes. "I'll make you proud." "You already have," I told her. She laughed through her tears. "You two always say that." "Because it's true." The next morning, I loaded her luggage into the truck before sunrise. As we pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back at our little white house. The maple tree stood tall beside it. The tulips she'd planted years earlier were blooming again. Life felt full of possibility. Neither Eleanor nor I could have imagined that every sacrifice we'd made for our daughter's future would one day become evidence inside a manila envelope. Or that decades later, those very memories would become the hardest words a father would ever have to speak. People like to believe families fall apart because of one terrible argument, one betrayal, one unforgivable mistake. But that's rarely how it happens. Families usually drift apart the same way shorelines disappear when you're sailing out to sea. Not all at once. So gradually that, by the time you realize you're lost, you can barely remember what home looked like. Looking back now, I can't point to one day and say, "That's when we lost Claire." Because we didn't lose her in a day. We lost her a little at a time. College changed her. Not in a bad way at first. It changed her the way college is supposed to. She became more confident. More curious. She challenged ideas instead of accepting them. She spoke about politics over Thanksgiving dinner. She corrected my grammar sometimes. Eleanor would kick me gently under the table whenever she noticed I was getting defensive. "She's learning," she'd whisper later. "That's what we wanted." She was right. We had wanted that. Every late shift. Every missed vacation. Every dollar we'd scraped together had been for exactly this reason. We wanted our daughter to have choices we'd never had. And she took them. The first time Claire brought Mark home, he arrived in a brand new black sedan that looked too expensive for a college student. He stepped out wearing loafers that probably cost more than my first month's paycheck at the mill. Tall, clean-cut, confident. He shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Whitaker, it's an honor to finally meet you." His smile was practiced. Not fake. Just polished. Like someone who'd spent years learning exactly how to make good first impressions. Eleanor adored him immediately. "He has wonderful manners," she whispered while washing dishes that night. "He certainly has confidence," I replied. She looked at me sideways. "You don't like him." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Truthfully, I didn't dislike Mark. I simply couldn't read him. With some people, you know where you stand after 5 minutes. With Mark, every answer seemed carefully measured. Every compliment perfectly timed. It wasn't dishonesty. It was control. At the time, I convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, Claire looked happy. And that was enough. They married 3 years later. It wasn't an extravagant wedding by today's standards. But it was still more than we could comfortably afford. The venue overlooked a small lake just outside Columbus. White roses lined the aisle. A string quartet played softly while guests found their seats. Claire looked radiant. When I walked her down the aisle, she squeezed my arm so tightly I thought she might never let go. "You okay?" I whispered. "I'm scared." "That's normal." "What if I'm not ready?" I smiled. "No one ever is." She laughed nervously. Then she asked the question every father secretly dreads. "Will you still need me after today?" I stopped walking for just a second. She looked up at me with the same eyes she'd had as a little girl. "I'll always need you." I kissed her forehead. "But today isn't about losing a daughter. It's about gaining another family." I believed those words. I truly did. The wedding itself was beautiful. The reception lasted until nearly midnight. Everyone danced. Everyone laughed. Claire pulled me onto the dance floor for one last father-daughter dance. Halfway through the song she rested her head against my shoulder. "Thank you?" "For what?" "For everything." I shrugged. "That's what dads do." "No." She looked up at me. "You gave me a life you never had." I swallowed hard. "You earned it." She shook her head. "You built it." Sometimes, the memories that hurt the most are the happiest ones. Because they remind you what once existed. Not long after the wedding, reality arrived. Claire and Mark found the perfect starter home. There was only one problem. They couldn't quite afford the down payment. I still remember the evening Claire came over by herself. She looked embarrassed. "Dad, what is it?" She stared into her coffee cup. "I hate asking." "Then don't ask." She looked confused. "What?" "If you need help, you don't have to ask." Tears filled her eyes immediately. "We're short." "How much?" She whispered the number. $45,000. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. That wasn't just money. It represented years of savings. Vacations we never took. Cars we kept driving long after they should have been replaced. Our retirement. That evening, after Claire left, Eleanor found me sitting alone on the back porch. "You've been out here an hour." "I know." "What are you thinking?" I looked toward the maple tree. "If we help them." She already knew. "We'll have to refinance." I nodded. "Our retirement changes." She sat beside me. "Do you regret helping her through college?" "Never." She slipped her hand into mine. "Then why would this be different?" I laughed softly. "Because we're getting older. We've always figured things out." There were those words again. The words that had carried us through 4 decades. We always do. 2 weeks later, we signed the loan papers. Claire cried when we handed her the cashier's check. She hugged us both. "I'll pay you back." I smiled. "No. You have to let me. You'll pay us back by building a happy life." At the time, that felt like enough. The grandchildren arrived a few years later. First Emma. Then Noah. Those children breathed life back into our home. Every Saturday became pancake day. Our backyard filled with soccer balls, toy trucks, sidewalk chalk, laughter. Eleanor knitted tiny sweaters every winter. I built a treehouse that took nearly 6 months because I insisted on making it sturdy enough to survive a tornado. Claire would often laugh. "Dad, they're 5. They'll grow. They'll outgrow it. Then their kids can use it." She'd roll her eyes exactly like she did as a teenager. Back then, she still visited, still called, still lingered after dinner instead of checking the time. Life felt balanced. Not perfect, but whole. Then Mark's career exploded. He became a regional executive for a financial consulting firm. The promotions came quickly. The raises came faster. They moved into a gated community with winding streets, immaculate landscaping, and homes so large they looked more like boutique hotels than family houses. The first time Eleanor and I visited, I noticed something strange. Nobody sat on their front porches. Garage doors opened. Cars disappeared inside. Doors closed again. The neighborhood was beautiful. And somehow, it felt lonely. Claire gave us the grand tour. "This is the theater room. This is Mark's office. This is the wine cellar." Eleanor smiled politely. "It's lovely." Claire kept walking. "And this is the guest suite." Guest suite. The words caught me off guard. We'd gone from parents to guests. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. Maybe I was. The changes stayed small at first. Sunday dinners became once a month. Then birthdays had to be rescheduled. Then holidays became shorter. Claire always had a reason. The kids had soccer. Mark had meetings. Someone was traveling. Someone wasn't feeling well. Always reasonable. Always understandable. Until one day, the pattern became impossible to ignore. She wasn't making room for us anymore. She was fitting us into the empty spaces. One afternoon, Eleanor sat beside the living room window watching rain drip from the gutters. "She's busy." I nodded. "Yes. She's raising teenagers." "I know. Life gets complicated." "It does." She looked over at me. "You think she's pulling away?" I hesitated. I searched for words that wouldn't hurt. "I think her life got so full that she forgot we're still standing here." Eleanor stared outside for a long time. Finally she smiled sadly. "I used to think children slowly stop needing their parents." She paused. "Nobody tells you parents never stop needing their children." That sentence settled into my chest like a stone. Because it was true. Not financially. Not physically. Emotionally. You spend decades becoming someone's safe place. Then one day, without either of you noticing, you become an appointment on their calendar. The final warning came almost 2 years before Eleanor's diagnosis. Claire had promised to come for Thanksgiving. She even volunteered to bring dessert. Eleanor baked all morning anyway. "Just in case," she said. The turkey rested on the table. The mashed potatoes stayed warm in the oven. Pumpkin pie cooled on the counter. 4 o'clock came. No Claire. No Mark. 5 o'clock. Still nothing. Finally my phone buzzed. "Sorry, Dad. Something came up. We'll celebrate another day. Love you." No phone call. No explanation. Just a text. I looked toward Eleanor. She was already quietly wrapping leftovers into containers before I'd even said a word. She'd read my face. "Don't." "What?" "Don't make excuses for her." I lowered the phone. She forced a smile. "The food freezes well." But later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I found one untouched pumpkin pie sitting alone on the kitchen counter. She'd made it because Claire said it was still her favorite. No one ever ate a slice. And as I threw it away the next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't dessert I was throwing into the trash. It was another small piece of the family we used to be. I just didn't know that something far worse was already waiting for us around the corner. There are moments that divide your life into two parts: the life before and the life after. You never know you're living the before until it's already gone. For us, that moment arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning in late February. The sky was gray. The roads were wet from a night of freezing rain. Eleanor insisted on driving herself to her doctor's appointment because, as she liked to remind me, she was perfectly capable of operating a car. I argued anyway. She rolled her eyes. After 50 years of marriage, we had perfected the art of pretending to fight. "I've driven through blizzards," she said, slipping on her coat. "I know. I drove Claire to school for 12 years. I know. I taught teenagers for 35 years. I know." She smiled triumphantly. "So stop hovering." "I'll stop hovering when you stop scaring me." She walked over, straightened my crooked collar, and kissed my cheek. "You worry too much. I married you. It came with the job." She laughed. "Fine. You can drive." I tried not to look too pleased. The appointment was supposed to be routine. Blood work. A follow-up scan. Nothing more. We'd already convinced ourselves that the persistent stomach pain she'd been having was probably a stubborn digestive issue. Maybe gallbladder problems. Maybe ulcers. Something manageable. Something temporary. We even joked about stopping for pie afterward. Eleanor wanted apple. I wanted pecan. Looking back, I think both of us knew something felt wrong. We just refused to give it a name. Hospitals have a smell that's impossible to forget. Disinfectant. Coffee. Plastic. Fear. It hangs in the air no matter how clean the building is. The waiting room television played a morning talk show no one was actually watching. A little boy pushed toy cars across the carpet while his mother filled out paperwork. An elderly man slept with his chin resting against his chest. Life kept happening around us. Ordinary life. Until a nurse called Eleanor's name. We followed her down a hallway that suddenly felt much longer than it should have. Dr. Patel had been Eleanor's physician for almost 15 years. He wasn't the kind of doctor who rushed through appointments. He listened. He remembered birthdays. He asked about grandchildren. That morning, he didn't smile. He entered the room carrying a folder that seemed unusually thick. He sat down, folded his hands, looked directly at Eleanor, then at me. I felt my stomach tighten. Doctors learn how to deliver bad news long before they ever have to deliver it. Patients learn to recognize the look long before the words arrive. "I'm afraid the skin showed something concerning." Silence. He turned the monitor toward us. Several white shapes appeared on the image. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but I knew enough to understand his expression. "We found a mass." The room seemed to shrink. Eleanor reached for my hand without taking her eyes off the screen. "We'll need additional testing," he continued gently. "But based on what we're seeing..." He paused. The pause said everything. "I believe we're dealing with ovarian cancer." The words floated in the air. They didn't sound real. They sounded like they belonged to another family. Another room. Another life. Not ours. Eleanor was the first to speak. "What stage?" Dr. Patel hesitated. "I don't want to speculate until the biopsy." She nodded slowly. "But..." He looked down. "If I had to estimate..." Another pause. "Likely stage 3. I squeezed Eleanor's hand so tightly I worried I might hurt her. She squeezed back. Almost as if she were comforting me. That was Eleanor. Even then. The drive home was almost completely silent. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. The windshield wipers moved back and forth with hypnotic rhythm. Neither of us turned on the radio. At a stoplight, I finally whispered, "We're going to fight this." She looked out the passenger window. "I know. We'll find the best doctors. I know. We'll get through it." She smiled faintly. "You don't know that." "No." I swallowed. "But I know we'll try." She reached across the console and took my hand. I never doubted that. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. The mailbox still leaned slightly to the left. The maple tree still cast shadows across the lawn. The porch swings still moved gently in the wind. Everything looked normal, which somehow made everything feel even more unreal. Inside, Eleanor quietly walked through every room. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, almost as if she were seeing the house for the first time. Finally, she stopped beside the family photographs lining the mantel. There was Claire at 5 years old with missing front teeth. Claire graduating high school. Claire in her wedding dress. Emma holding Noah as a baby. Eleanor picked up one picture. The 4 of us smiling at Christmas years earlier. When did everyone grow up? I didn't answer. Because I knew she wasn't really asking. The biopsy confirmed it. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. Aggressive. Treatment needed to begin immediately. The oncologist outlined the plan with clinical precision. Surgery. Chemotherapy. Monitoring. Possible radiation. The survival statistics were carefully explained. I heard almost none of it. My attention stayed fixed on Eleanor. She sat perfectly still. Listening. Taking notes. As though this were another parent-teacher conference. When the doctor finally asked if we had questions, Eleanor surprised everyone. Will I lose my hair? The doctor nodded gently. Most likely. She smiled politely. I thought so. That was her first concern. Not dying. Not pain. Hair. Later, in the parking garage, I asked why. She laughed softly. I taught middle school for 35 years. So? I've survived worse than bald. Then her smile disappeared. I just don't want the grandchildren to be frightened. I couldn't speak. Treatment began 2 weeks later. The infusion center became our second home. Rows of reclining chairs. 4 poles. Soft blankets. Televisions mounted high on the walls. Nurses who somehow managed to smile through 12-hour shifts. There was a strange little community there. People who never asked what you did for a living. They asked one question instead. Which round are you on? That became the language of survival. First round. Fourth round. Final round. Good scan. Bad scan. One woman knitted blankets while chemicals dripped into her veins. A retired firefighter told terrible jokes that somehow made everyone laugh. A young mother read bedtime stories over video calls because she was too weak to go home before her children slept. Cancer stripped away pretense. Nobody cared about expensive watches, job titles, fancy neighborhoods. Everyone was simply trying to make it to tomorrow. The first chemotherapy session lasted nearly 6 hours. Eleanor smiled through most of it. She even comforted the woman sitting beside her after the woman's 4 infiltrated. You're unbelievable, I whispered. She shrugged. Everyone's scared. So are you. She looked at the clear liquid slowly entering her veins. Yes. But fear isn't the same as giving up. The side effects arrived quickly. Nausea. Exhaustion. Bone pain. Mouth sores. Sleepless nights. Food she had loved for decades suddenly tasted like metal. Coffee became unbearable. Even homemade chicken soup couldn't stay down some days. One night around 2 in the morning, I woke to find her sitting alone on the bathroom floor. She wasn't crying. She simply looked exhausted. I didn't want to wake you. I knelt beside her. You never have to go through this alone. She leaned against my shoulder. I know. We sat there together on the cold tile floor for nearly 20 minutes without saying another word. Sometimes love isn't knowing what to say. Sometimes it's refusing to leave. Then came the morning her hair began falling out. She was brushing it in front of the bathroom mirror. At first, it was only a few strands. Then dozens. Then clumps. She stared silently at the brush. I stood frozen in the doorway. Without speaking, she continued brushing until there was almost nothing left. Finally, she looked at her reflection. I don't recognize her. I walked over, took the brush from her hand, then wrapped my arms around her from behind. I do. She closed her eyes. You always will. Always. That afternoon, before she could change her mind, we drove to a small barber shop on the edge of town. The owner closed the shop for 30 minutes just for us. No appointments. No interruptions. No audience. As the last strands fell to the floor, Eleanor watched herself in the mirror with remarkable calm. When it was finished, she touched her smooth scalp. Then smiled. I've had worse haircuts. The barber laughed. I didn't. Because I was too busy trying not to cry. That night, after Eleanor had finally fallen asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was silent except for the refrigerator humming softly. I opened our online bank account. The numbers glowed on the screen. Savings. Almost gone. Retirement. Shrinking fast. Medical expenses. Growing every week. I stared at the total until the screen blurred. For the first time in my life, I realized that loving someone wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was knowing there was no amount of work, sacrifice, or determination that could guarantee you'd keep them. And just as I reached to close the laptop, my phone lit up with Claire's name. For one hopeful second, I thought maybe she somehow knew we needed her. Instead, her message read, Sorry, Dad. Things are crazy this week. Can we talk another time? I looked toward the bedroom where Eleanor slept. Then back at the glowing screen. And for the first time, a small, painful question entered my mind. Had our daughter become so busy building her own life that she no longer saw ours falling apart? There's a strange loneliness that comes with being sick. Not just the illness itself. Not the medications. Not even the pain. It's the way the world quietly keeps moving while yours slows to a crawl. People still rush to work. Neighbors mow their lawns. Children ride bicycles down the street. The mail still arrives every afternoon. Everything looks exactly the same. Except your entire life now revolves around doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and hoping the phone doesn't ring with bad news. That spring, our calendar stopped looking like a calendar. It looked like a hospital itinerary. Monday, blood work. Wednesday, chemotherapy. Friday, CT scan. The spaces in between weren't really days anymore. They were recovery days. Every morning followed almost the same routine. I'd wake before sunrise, make coffee for myself and peppermint tea for Eleanor, then quietly pack a small tote bag. Water bottles. Crackers. A blanket she'd knitted years before. Her crossword puzzle book. A charger for her phone. And the little stuffed bear Emma had given her after the diagnosis. The bear wore a tiny pink ribbon around its neck. Emma had named him Captain Brave. Eleanor never went to treatment without him. The infusion center became so familiar that the nurses greeted us by name before checking the chart. Morning, Harold. Morning, Eleanor. How are we feeling today? It was always we. Not you. Cancer had quietly turned two people into one patient. One battle. One exhausted team. Nurse Linda, a woman with silver hair and endless patience, always tucked a warm blanket around Eleanor's shoulders before starting the 4. You spoil her, I teased one morning. Linda smiled. No. She glanced at Eleanor. She reminds me of my mother. Eleanor reached over and squeezed her hand. You remind me that kindness still exists. Those little conversations mattered. They reminded us that compassion hadn't disappeared from the world. It simply showed up in unexpected places. One afternoon, while Eleanor slept through her infusion, I wandered down the hallway to refill her water bottle. Near the vending machine sat an older man about my age. He stared at a cup of untouched coffee. We nodded politely. After a minute he spoke. Your wife? I nodded. Yours? He looked down. She passed 3 weeks ago. I didn't know what to say. He smiled anyway. I still come here on Thursdays. Why? They have the best coffee in town, I looked at the untouched cup. Neither of us believed that. He finally admitted the truth. I just don't know where else to go. His words stayed with me long after we left. Because I understood. When someone becomes the center of your world, the thought of that world ending is almost impossible to imagine. Money became another illness altogether. Every treatment generated another stack of paperwork. Insurance approved one medication. Denied another. Appeals. Phone calls. Hold music. Reference numbers. Transferred departments. Hours disappeared into conversations that never seemed to solve anything. One evening I spent nearly 2 hours arguing over an $842 claim. The representative kept repeating, "I'm sorry, sir, but according to our policy." Finally I interrupted. "Have you ever watched your wife throw up for 3 straight days?" Silence. No. You haven't. I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," she answered quietly. "My mother had breast cancer." The anger drained out of me immediately. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Either of us spoke for a few seconds. Then she whispered, "I'll see what else I can do." Sometimes the person on the other end of the phone is fighting battles you know nothing about. At the hardware store, I picked up every extra shift they would give me. Most of my coworkers were young enough to be my grandchildren. They offered to lift heavy bags of concrete for me. I usually refused. Not because I wanted to prove anything. Because I needed to feel useful. If I couldn't save Eleanor, at least I could keep earning. My manager, Dave, noticed before anyone else. He called me into his office one afternoon. "You've worked 23 days straight." "I know. You need a day off." "I need overtime." He looked at me for a long moment. "You don't have to tell me what's going on." I lowered my eyes. But I hope you know you're not alone." The next Friday, an envelope appeared in my locker. No name. Just my employee number. Inside was a gift card to the grocery store. $500. I spent days trying to figure out who left it. No one ever admitted it. Sometimes dignity comes from giving anonymously. Claire called every few days. Always at inconvenient moments. Usually while driving somewhere. "Dad, how'd treatment go?" "It was rough." "I'm sorry. Your mom slept most of the afternoon." "I'm glad she's resting. I think she'd like to hear your voice." "I wish I could." A pause. "I'm running into a meeting." Another pause. "I'll call this weekend." Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. I started noticing something strange. She asked about the treatments. She rarely asked about Eleanor. There was a difference. One was information. The other was love. Eleanor never complained about Claire. Not once. Whenever I expressed disappointment, she gently stopped me. "She's overwhelmed. She's busy. She's raising teenagers." I finally asked the question I'd been carrying for months. "What if she's just choosing other things?" Eleanor looked genuinely hurt. "Don't say that." "Why?" "Because once a parent starts believing that..." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I understood. Hope was sometimes the only medicine either of us had left. Late one Saturday afternoon, Claire unexpectedly stopped by. For a moment, it felt like old times. She hugged her mother. Brought flowers. Even stayed for coffee. Eleanor beamed the entire visit. She laughed more that afternoon than she had in weeks. I almost convinced myself things were getting better. Then Claire's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. "Oh." She stood immediately. "I have to go." "You just got here," Eleanor said softly. "I know. It's work. It always is." Claire hesitated. Then kissed her mother's forehead. "I'll come back next week." She left 10 minutes later. Eleanor watched through the window until the car disappeared. Then she quietly picked up the untouched coffee cup Claire had abandoned. It got cold. I looked at the front door. So did something else. 3 weeks later, something happened that changed everything. Claire came over one Sunday afternoon after church. She seemed distracted. Rushed. She kept checking her smartwatch while talking. When she finally left, she drove away in such a hurry that she forgot her phone on the kitchen counter. Neither of us noticed at first. About 20 minutes later, the screen lit up with a message. I picked it up automatically. Not to read it. Only to see who was calling. I figured it might be important. The screen wasn't locked. A message banner slid across the top. Brian, did you tell them yet? Brian. Our son. Claire's younger brother. He'd moved to Arizona years earlier. The message disappeared almost immediately. I should have put the phone down. I intended to. Then another message arrived. Brian, you can't keep avoiding this forever. My stomach tightened. Avoiding what? Without thinking, I tapped the conversation. Maybe I was looking for context. Maybe I was looking for reassurance. Instead, I found something I wish I had never seen. Months of messages. Some ordinary. Some harmless. Then one that made my hands go cold. Claire, Mom and Dad are becoming a real burden. I stared at the words. Certain I had misunderstood. I kept reading. Brian, they're sick, Claire. They're scared. A few seconds later came her reply. Claire, I know. But this medical stuff never ends. Every conversation is about treatments or bills. Mark says we need to set boundaries before it starts affecting our own finances. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. Another message. Brian, they're our parents. Claire answered almost immediately. Claire, we have to think about our own future too. I refuse to let emotional decisions ruin our retirement. I couldn't breathe. The room suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. Too empty. Behind me, I heard Eleanor humming softly in the garden, completely unaware. I slowly locked the phone and placed it back on the counter exactly where I'd found it. My hands were shaking. Not because of the words themselves. Because they belonged to the little girl who had once promised. When you're old, I'll take care of both of you. For the first time in my life. I wondered if that promise had been forgotten. Or if it had simply become too expensive to keep. And standing alone in my own kitchen, I made a decision that would lead directly to the envelope hidden inside my closet. I was going to gather every piece of our family's history. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I feared that one day, the truth might be the only thing powerful enough to wake my daughter up. I wish I could tell you that after reading those messages, I confronted Claire immediately. That I called her, demanded an explanation, and forced everything into the open. But that isn't what happened. Sometimes the people who have spent their entire lives keeping a family together become the very people most afraid of pulling it apart. So I stayed quiet. Not because I wasn't hurt. Because I was. More than I'd ever been. I stayed quiet because I kept hoping I was wrong. Maybe I had taken the messages out of context. Maybe Mark had been putting ideas in her head. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she'd written those words on one of the worst days of her life and regretted them the moment she hit send. Hope has a way of making excuses that logic never would. So instead of confronting my daughter, I started collecting memories. It began with an old filing cabinet in the basement. The same dented gray cabinet that had followed us through 3 different houses. Most of its drawers held ordinary things: tax returns, appliance manuals, insurance policies, faded warranties for refrigerators we no longer owned. But the bottom drawer, that one held our lives. Birth certificates, marriage license, mortgage papers, Claire's report cards, hospital bracelets from when she and Brian were born. Even Mother's Day cards, made from construction paper with crooked hearts glued to the front. I hadn't opened that drawer in years. Dust clung to the metal handle as I pulled it open. For a long moment, I simply stared. 50 years. Reduced to folders. I carried the first box upstairs and spread everything across the dining room table after Eleanor had gone to bed. One paper became another. Then another. Each document pulled me into a different year. A different sacrifice. A different promise. Near the bottom of one folder, I found the receipt for Claire's first bicycle. Blue. 20-inch wheels. Training wheels included. Price, $89.95. I smiled despite myself. That bicycle had nearly ended my career. Not because of the bike. Because of what it took to buy it. Claire had wanted that exact model for months. Every time we walked past Carter's Sporting Goods, she'd stop at the window. Not asking. Just looking. Children often understand more than adults realize. She knew money was tight. She never begged. She simply admired it from the sidewalk. One evening, Eleanor found me studying our checkbook. We can't. I know. We're already behind this month. I know. So why are you torturing yourself? I closed the ledger. Because she deserves one childhood. The following Saturday, I accepted an emergency roofing job. It paid cash. 8 hours under the July sun. By the time I climbed down that ladder, my shoulders felt like they'd been set on fire. But I had enough money. I still remember hiding the bicycle in Mr. Jenkins' garage until Claire's birthday. When she ran outside and saw it leaning against the porch railing, she screamed so loudly half the neighborhood came outside. She threw her arms around my waist. This is the best day ever! No investment I'd ever made earned a greater return than that hug. A week later, while sorting through another box, I found something unexpected. A small spiral notebook. Its pink cover was faded almost white. Across the front, written in crooked pencil letters, were the words, Claire's secret journal. I smiled. She'd been 10. I had no business reading it. Then a folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages. It wasn't really part of the journal. It was a school assignment. Write about your hero. I hesitated. Then unfolded it. My hero is my dad. The handwriting was messy. Several words were misspelled. My dad fixes things even when people say they can't be fixed. He comes home tired but still plays catch with me. When I get scared at night, he tells me everything will be okay. I want to grow up and be kind like him. At the bottom, in larger letters. When my mom and dad are old, I'm going to take care of them because heroes shouldn't have to work forever. I sat there for a long time. The paper trembled in my hands. Children don't lie about love. Adults. Sometimes they forget it. I carefully placed the assignment inside the manila envelope. Not as evidence. As a reminder. Of who Claire had once been. Meanwhile, Eleanor's treatments became harder. The first few rounds had left her exhausted. Now they left her hollow. There were days she barely had the strength to walk from the bedroom to the kitchen. One afternoon, I found her standing in front of the washing machine, staring at a basket of clothes. I can't. You don't have to. I used to wash 5 loads in one morning. I stepped beside her. I've got it. She looked embarrassed. I hate this. I know. I hate needing help. You've spent 50 years helping everyone else. She shook her head. It feels different. I reached into the basket and held up one of my old work shirts. You know what this is? A shirt. No. It's proof. Proof of what? That for 50 years you never let me do enough around this house. For the first time that day. She laughed. Not loudly. But enough. Sometimes humor doesn't solve pain. It simply reminds pain that it isn't completely in charge. Brian called every Sunday evening from Arizona. Unlike Claire, he never rushed the conversation. He asked detailed questions. What did the doctor say? Did Mom eat today? How's her energy? One evening he became unusually quiet. Finally he asked, Has Claire been around much? I chose my words carefully. She's busy. Another long silence. Dad? What? I know about the messages. I froze. You do? I told her she was wrong. I stared out the kitchen window. You argued. For hours. What happened? Brian sighed. She kept saying she wasn't a bad daughter. I never said she was. I know. He rubbed his forehead loudly enough that I could hear it through the phone. I think she's trapped. By what? The life she built. I frowned. What do you mean? You remember when she got promoted? Of course. That promotion came with new friends. So? They compete over everything. Houses. Schools. Vacations. Cars. Who renovated their kitchen? Who belongs to which country club? He paused. I don't think Claire even realizes she's trying to keep up anymore. I leaned back slowly. So you think this is about money? No. I think it's about fear. What fear? He answered quietly. The fear of looking like she's falling behind. His words stayed with me. Because fear doesn't always make people run away. Sometimes it convinces them to run in the wrong direction. A few days later, I had to stop by Claire's house to return a casserole dish Eleanor had insisted on washing herself. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. Perfect lawns. Fresh mulch. Luxury SUVs. Not a blade of grass out of place. As I walked toward the front door, I noticed a contractor's truck parked in the driveway. Inside, workers carried out old cabinets. Claire greeted me with a distracted hug. Sorry about the mess. What's going on? We're remodeling. I looked around. The kitchen already looked nicer than any room I'd ever owned. She smiled proudly. We're opening the whole space. One of the contractors walked by. Quartz countertops arrive Thursday. Another added. Imported from Italy. I nodded politely. Then glanced at the estimate sitting on the island. It wasn't hidden. Maybe she hadn't noticed. Or maybe she never imagined I'd look. At the top of the page. Kitchen renovation, $86,400. For a second, I couldn't process the number. Nearly the exact amount we'd spent helping pay for her college. I quickly looked away before she noticed. Claire handed me a cup of coffee. What do you think? I forced a smile. It'll be beautiful. And I meant it. It would. But as I stood inside that enormous kitchen, listening to contractors discuss marble finishes and custom lighting, I couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor quietly cutting her nausea pills in half some weeks to make prescriptions last until payday. Neither life was fake. But one had somehow become invisible to the other. That evening, after Eleanor fell asleep, I added another document to the envelope. Not because of the renovation itself. People have every right to spend money they've earned. No. I added the estimate because it represented something much deeper. Perspective. Or rather, the loss of it. The envelope was no longer a collection of receipts. It had become the story of an entire family. A story I prayed would never need to be told. But deep down, I could feel the day getting closer. The day when silence would no longer protect anyone. And somewhere across town, completely unaware, Claire was preparing for what she believed would be a simple anniversary dinner. She had no idea her father had been carrying 50 years of memories inside a single worn manila envelope. Nor that before the night was over, every one of those memories would change the course of their family forever. The strange thing about life-changing moments is that they almost always begin like ordinary days. No thunder. No dramatic warning. Just routines. Small conversations. Familiar roads. The morning of our 50th wedding anniversary started with Eleanor standing in front of our bedroom mirror, trying to decide which dress still fit. Most of her clothes hung too loosely now. Cancer had taken nearly 30 pounds from her, and no amount of pretending could hide it. She held up a navy dress first. Too big. Then a cream-colored one. Too formal. Finally, she reached for the pale green dress she'd worn at Claire's wedding more than 20 years earlier. She smiled the moment she touched it. I think this one still remembers happier days. I watched from the doorway. It remembers a beautiful bride. She looked over her shoulder. Which one? The only one I've ever noticed. She rolled her eyes, but I caught the faint blush that still appeared after 50 years. Some things never changed. Thank God for that. Helping Eleanor get dressed had become one of the quiet rituals either of us ever talked about. She struggled with tiny buttons because the chemotherapy left her fingertips numb. Without saying a word, I stepped behind her and fastened each button carefully. The room was silent except for birds singing outside the open window. When I finished, she reached back and squeezed my hand. "You make this seem so easy." "No." "What?" "I make it look easy." She turned toward me. "There's a difference?" "A big one." She rested her forehead against mine. "I know this isn't the retirement we imagined." I smiled gently. "No. It isn't. We were supposed to travel. I remember. Alaska. The Grand Canyon. You promised we'd finally see Maine in the fall. We still might." She laughed softly. "You're impossible." "No. I just haven't cancelled the dream yet." She looked into my eyes for a long moment. Don't what?" "Stop dreaming because of me." I kissed her forehead. "I don't know how." Before leaving the house, I walked into the garage under the excuse of checking the tire pressure. The truth was, I wanted a minute alone. The garage still smelled faintly of sawdust and motor oil. Against the far wall sat the old wooden workbench where I'd spent countless evenings repairing lawnmowers, bicycles, broken chairs, anything that could save us money. Above it hung dozens of tools collected over a lifetime. Each one had a story. The hammer my father gave me when I bought my first house. The level Claire used while helping me build the tree house. The tape measure Eleanor had accidentally run through the washing machine. Ordinary objects. Extraordinary memories. I reached into the cabinet beneath the bench and removed the manila envelope. It felt heavier now. Not because I'd added so many papers. Because every page carried emotion. For several seconds I considered leaving it behind. Maybe tonight would go well. Maybe we'd laugh. Eat good food. Take pictures. Celebrate. Maybe I'd been preparing for a conversation that would never happen. I almost placed the envelope back. Then my eyes landed on a sticky note attached to the cabinet. Eleanor had written it years earlier. "Don't forget your lunch. I love you. E." I smiled. Folded the note carefully into my wallet. Then slipped the envelope inside my sport coat. Just in case. Claire had chosen the restaurant. Riverview Grill. The nicest place in town. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. White linen tablecloths. Fresh flowers. Live piano music on Friday and Saturday evenings. It wasn't the sort of place Eleanor and I visited often. Truthfully, we couldn't afford to. But Claire insisted. "It's your golden anniversary. You deserve something special." Those words echoed in my mind as we drove toward town. The late afternoon sun shimmered across the water. People strolled along the riverwalk. Teenagers laughed near the fountain. The world looked impossibly peaceful. I wished our family felt the same. We arrived 10 minutes early. Old habits. I still believed arriving on time showed respect. The hostess greeted us warmly. "Happy anniversary." She led us to a table beside the windows. The view took Eleanor's breath away. "Look at that." The river reflected streaks of orange and gold as the sun slowly began its descent. "It's beautiful." I pulled out her chair. She sat carefully, still moving slower than she used to. For a few minutes. It was perfect. We talked about nothing important. The ducks gliding across the water. Whether the flowers outside our house would bloom again before autumn. Emma's upcoming birthday. No cancer. No bills. No fear. Just us. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "Running 15 minutes late. Traffic." I looked at the message. Then at the nearly empty parking lot outside. There wasn't enough traffic in our town to delay anyone 15 minutes. I showed Eleanor anyway. She smiled. At least she's coming. Always finding the best in people. Even when they made it difficult. Claire and Mark arrived 23 minutes later. Not 15. 23. She hurried across the restaurant carrying an expensive designer handbag. Mark followed behind, still typing on his phone. Sorry! Claire kissed Eleanor's cheek. Everything took longer than expected. It's fine, Eleanor said immediately. We just got here. It wasn't true. But she said it anyway. Mark finally looked up from his screen. Happy anniversary. He shook my hand. His grip felt distracted. His phone buzzed again before he even sat down. I'm sorry. He smiled awkwardly. Work never stops. I nodded politely. Inside, something tightened. The waitress handed everyone menus. Claire barely glanced at hers. I already know what I want. Mark smiled. So do I. Eleanor opened hers slowly. She studied every price before looking at the descriptions. I pretended not to notice. After 50 years together, I knew exactly what she was doing. Calculating. Wondering whether she should order something cheaper. Still trying to protect our finances. On our anniversary. The thought broke my heart. A young waiter approached the table. His name tag read. Carlos. He couldn't have been older than 25. Friendly smile. Kind eyes. Good evening, folks. He looked at Eleanor. Happy 50th anniversary. She beamed. Thank you. My grandparents celebrated 52 years together before my grandfather passed. His smile softened. So this table is special tonight. Eleanor reached across and touched his hand. That's very sweet. Carlos glanced around the table. Can I start everyone with drinks? Before I could answer, Claire spoke. We'll take the 2018 Cabernet. Carlos nodded. One bottle? Mark looked up from his phone. Actually. He closed the menu. Let's make it two. Claire laughed. It's a celebration. Carlos smiled politely and wrote it down. I caught a glimpse of the wine list. $120 a bottle. I quietly looked away. When Carlos returned for dinner orders, Claire chose the dry-aged ribeye. $95. Mark ordered lobster. Eleanor smiled apologetically. I'll have the grilled salmon. The least expensive entree on the page. I closed my menu. And I'll take the house salad. Carlos looked at me. Just the salad, sir? That's perfect. He hesitated. Then nodded. Very good. After he walked away, Claire frowned. Dad? What? That's all you're eating? I'm not very hungry. It wasn't entirely a lie. Stress has a way of stealing your appetite. What I didn't tell her was that I'd quietly skipped lunch. Not because I forgot. Because I wanted enough room on the credit card to cover dinner if I had to. As conversation drifted from grandchildren to neighborhood news, I noticed something else. Mark checked his phone 12 times before the appetizers arrived. Claire checked hers 8. Each notification pulled their attention somewhere else. Emails. Texts. Stock alerts. Calendar reminders. Meanwhile, Eleanor watched the river. Completely content. At one point she whispered, I miss when restaurants felt slower. Claire looked up. What do you mean? When people used to come just to be together. For a split second. Nobody answered. The appetizers arrived. Calamari. Bruschetta. Fresh bread still warm from the oven. Claire and Mark immediately reached for the plates. Eleanor waited until everyone else had taken something first. Just as she always had. She picked up one small piece of bread. Broke it in half. Then quietly pushed the larger half toward me. A habit she'd had for decades. Always giving me the bigger piece. Even now. Even after cancer. Even after 50 years. Across the table, Claire never noticed. I did. Because love often hides in gestures so small that only the people living inside them can see. I looked at Eleanor. She smiled. Then suddenly pressed 2 fingers gently against her stomach. Just for a second. Long enough for me to know the nausea had returned. Long enough for her to pretend it hadn't. No one else seemed to notice. Except Carlos. As he passed by, he slowed almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "would you like some ginger tea? My grandmother swore by it whenever she wasn't feeling well." Eleanor looked surprised. "That would be lovely. No charge." He smiled. "I'll bring it right out." I watched him walk away. Then looked back at my daughter. She was laughing at something on her phone. And for reasons I couldn't yet explain. A quiet feeling settled over me. The evening wasn't slipping away. It was building towards something. I could almost feel it. Like distant thunder you can't hear yet. But somehow know is coming. The first half of dinner passed the way so many difficult evenings do. Everyone smiled. Everyone played their part. The conversation skimmed safely across the surface, carefully avoiding anything that might disturb the illusion that everything was fine. Claire talked about Emma's college visits. Mark complained about interest rates and the housing market. Eleanor asked about Noah's baseball season. I mostly listened. Every now and then I'd glance out at the river, watching the current carry leaves downstream. It struck me that rivers never argue with time. They simply keep moving. Families, on the other hand, sometimes spend years pretending they haven't changed. Carlos returned with Eleanor's ginger tea before the Atres arrived. "I hope this helps." She wrapped both hands around the warm cup. "It already has." He smiled politely and walked away. As he disappeared into the kitchen, Eleanor took one careful sip. "I forgot how much I like ginger. You used to drink it every winter," I reminded her. "I know." She smiled faintly. "I've forgotten so many little things." "No. You've just had bigger things to remember." She reached under the table and found my hand. The touch was gentle. Familiar. The kind that needed no words. Claire looked up briefly. "You two still hold hands all the time?" I chuckled. "It's cheaper than therapy." Everyone laughed. Even Mark. For a moment, the tension eased. If someone had walked past our table just then, they would have seen an ordinary family celebrating an extraordinary milestone. They never would have guessed how close we were to breaking apart. The Atres arrived in a parade of polished plates. The ribeye sizzled as Carlos set it in front of Claire. The lobster glistened beneath melted butter. Eleanor's salmon was simple. Perfectly cooked. My salad looked exactly like every house salad I'd ever ordered. None of it mattered. I barely tasted a bite. Instead, I watched Eleanor carefully cut her food into tiny pieces. The chemotherapy had left her exhausted, and even eating required effort now. Halfway through the meal, she quietly set her fork down. "I'm full." She'd eaten less than a quarter of the fish. Claire frowned. "Mom, that's all? I'm just not very hungry." "You have to eat." "I know." Eleanor smiled apologetically. "I'm trying." Claire nodded, but she didn't really understand. How could she? She wasn't there on the mornings when even toast became impossible. She hadn't watched her mother spend 20 minutes convincing herself to swallow a single spoonful of soup. She saw the illness. She didn't see the battle. Mark dabbed his mouth with a napkin and leaned back in his chair. "So," he looked at Claire, "you wanted to talk tonight?" Claire hesitated. For the first time all evening, she looked uncomfortable. She reached for her wine glass but didn't drink. Instead, she took a slow breath. "Mom. Dad. There are some things we need to discuss." Eleanor looked at her with complete trust. "What is it, sweetheart?" Claire glanced briefly at Mark. It lasted only a second. But I noticed. He gave the smallest nod. Almost invisible. Permission. Encouragement. Maybe both. Then she turned back toward us. "It's about the treatments." The words immediately changed the air around the table. I felt Eleanor's fingers tighten around mine. Claire spoke carefully. Almost professionally. The same tone she'd probably used during board meetings. "We've been thinking a lot lately." Mark remained silent, letting her lead. You've both been under incredible stress. I nodded slowly. That's true. And financially. She searched for the right phrase. Things seemed to be getting harder. Neither Eleanor nor I answered. Because that was true too. Claire leaned forward. I just think maybe everyone needs to start having realistic conversations. There it was. That word. Realistic. Sometimes people use that word when what they really mean is less compassionate. I don't understand, Eleanor said softly. Claire exhaled. The treatments. She looked directly at her mother. They're expensive. Another pause. They're physically exhausting. Another. And nobody knows how much longer this could go on. The restaurant suddenly felt quieter. Not silent. Just quieter. Like the room itself had begun listening. I asked the simplest question I could think of. What are you saying? Claire swallowed. I'm saying. She looked down at the tablecloth. Maybe it's time to think about quality of life. The sentence landed gently. Almost kindly. Which somehow made it hurt more. Eleanor blinked. What do you mean? Claire rushed to explain. I just mean there are wonderful hospice programs now. My heartbeat slowed. Not sped up. Slowed. The way it does when your mind refuses to believe what your ears just heard. Mark finally spoke. No one wants anyone to suffer. He folded his hands neatly on the table. Sometimes continuing treatment isn't always the best option. For several seconds, no one moved. I looked at my wife. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She simply stared at the white tablecloth. Almost as though she were trying to understand a language she'd never heard before. Finally she whispered. So? She looked at Claire. You think I should stop fighting? Claire's face changed immediately. No. That's not what I meant. It sounded like it. No, Mom. I'm just saying. She struggled to finish. There comes a point where everyone has to think about what's sustainable. Sustainable. Another carefully chosen word. Corporate. Logical. Emotionally empty. I slowly placed my fork beside my plate. The sound was almost inaudible. Yet somehow everyone at the table noticed. I looked at Claire. When did you start talking like this? She frowned. What? When did my little girl stop saying Mom? And start saying the treatments? She stared back at me. I don't understand. I know. Mark leaned forward. Harold. His voice remained calm. No one's questioning how much you love Eleanor. I should hope not. But you've taken on enormous debt. We have. You've refinanced your home. Yes. You've emptied your retirement. That's correct. He nodded once. So eventually. He paused. Something has to give. There it was. Finally. The sentence he'd wanted to say all along. Something has to give. I looked at Eleanor. Then back at him. My wife isn't something. Mark immediately shifted. I didn't mean. I know exactly what you meant. Claire reached across the table. Dad. Please don't make this into something it isn't. I stared at her. What exactly is it then? We're worried. About your mother? A pause. Our future too. The words escaped before she could stop them. The instant they did, I saw regret flash across her face. She hadn't meant to say that part aloud. But she had. And once truth leaves your mouth, it never agrees to go back inside. The river outside continued flowing. The pianist in the corner quietly played an old jazz standard. Silverware clinked somewhere behind us. Life continued. Yet our table had become its own world. One where 50 years of sacrifice sat on one side, and 47 years of forgotten gratitude sat on the other. I looked down at my left hand. The old scar stretched across my palm. White. Crooked. Permanent. Without thinking, I rubbed it with my thumb. Eleanor noticed. She always noticed. She knew exactly what that scar meant. She knew exactly what memories it carried. Claire followed my gaze. Dad? I slowly looked back up. Do you remember how I got this scar? She blinked. The construction accident. That's right. You told us 100 times. No. I shook my head gently. I told you how it happened. I leaned back in my chair. But I never told you what it cost. For the first time that evening, my hand drifted toward the inside pocket of my sport coat. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough for Eleanor to notice. Her eyes widened ever so slightly. She knew what was inside. She also knew, once that envelope came out, nothing about this family would ever be the same. There are moments when anger feels loud. This wasn't one of them. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even breathing hard. The strange thing about heartbreak is that, after it reaches a certain depth, it becomes unbelievably calm. I looked at my daughter for what felt like the first time all evening. Not the executive in the tailored navy blazer. Not the homeowner with the renovated kitchen. Not the woman worried about retirement accounts and long-term financial planning. I searched for the little girl who used to run into my arms every evening when I came home smelling of sawdust and engine grease. For a brief second, I thought I saw her. Then she looked away. And she was gone again. I slowly pushed my chair back. The legs scraped softly against the hardwood floor. The sound wasn't loud. But it was enough. Several nearby diners glanced toward our table. The pianist stopped playing mid-song, sensing something had shifted. Carlos looked over from the service station, concern written plainly across his face. Eleanor reached for my sleeve. Harold! Her voice trembled. Not with fear. With recognition. She knew what I was about to do. She also knew I'd spent months praying I never would. I rested my hand gently over hers. It's okay. She searched my face. No. She whispered. Please don't let this become bigger than tonight. I smiled sadly. It became bigger than tonight a long time ago. Then I looked at Claire. You wanted to have a realistic conversation. She swallowed. Yes. So let's have one. My fingers slipped inside the pocket of my old sport coat. The manila envelope caught for just a second against the lining before sliding free. It looked ordinary. Worn around the edges. Bent from being carried so often. Nothing about it suggested that it held 50 years of a family's history. Mark frowned. What's that? I ignored the question. Instead, I placed the envelope gently on the white tablecloth between us. No dramatic flourish. No anger. Just quiet certainty. Claire looked confused. Dad? What is this? The story. What story? Ours. I untied the string around the envelope. For a brief moment, I simply rested my hand on top of the papers. Memories have weight. Far more than paper ever should. Then I reached inside and removed the first document. A faded bank statement. The edges had yellowed with age. I laid it carefully on the table. Do you remember your freshman year at Michigan? Claire nodded slowly. Of course. You called us one night. She looked puzzled. I don't remember. I do. I smiled faintly. You were crying because the financial aid office had made a mistake. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. You thought you were going to lose your housing, she whispered. Yes. You remember now. She nodded. I remember. I slid the statement toward her. That same week, I withdrew $87,000. Her eyes dropped to the document. I don't understand. That was our retirement savings. Silence. We emptied it. So you could stay in school. Claire looked up immediately. Dad? I never knew. No. You weren't supposed to. I reached into the envelope again. This time, I removed a photocopy of loan documents. Fresh signatures. Our signatures. Mine and Eleanor's. 5 years later. I continued. You and your first husband found a house. Claire closed her eyes. The memory was returning. You were short on the down payment. I told you I'd pay you back. You did. She looked surprised. I did. I nodded. You paid us back. She frowned. I don't remember sending checks. You didn't. I smiled gently. You gave us 2 grandchildren. For the first time all evening. Tears filled Claire's eyes. But the $45,000. I tapped the loan papers. We borrowed against our own home. Mark leaned closer, reading the numbers himself. His expression changed. Almost imperceptibly. The certainty he'd carried into dinner began to crack. Another document. Another year. Another sacrifice. This receipt. I held it up. Is from the surgery on my hand. Claire looked at the scar. Then back at me. I know about the accident. No. I shook my head. You know there was an accident. I turned the receipt over. The man I pulled out from under that steel beam was named Daniel. Neither Claire nor Mark spoke. He'd been married 11 months. His wife was pregnant. The beam shifted. He froze. I didn't. I looked down at my scar. I lost most of the strength in this hand. I slowly flexed my fingers. It still aches every winter. Claire's lips parted. You never told me. No. I told you I got hurt at work. I looked directly into her eyes. I never told you why I kept going back. Another pause. Because I needed the overtime. So your braces could stay on. She stared at me as if she'd never seen me before. The restaurant had become almost unnaturally quiet. No one was pretending not to listen anymore. Nearby conversations had faded into whispers. Even the servers moved more slowly, instinctively giving us space. Carlos stood several yards away, carrying a tray he no longer seemed aware he was holding. I reached into the envelope once more. This time. Medical bills. Stacks of them. One after another. Each neatly organized. Insurance statements. Prescription receipts. Chemotherapy invoices. Hospital balances. I spread them carefully across the table. Not dramatically. Methodically. Like a man laying bricks. This, I said quietly, is 1 month. Claire stared at the numbers. $8,400. 7,900. 12,000. Insurance adjustment. Patient responsibility. Collection notice. Another collection notice. Another. Another. Her breathing became shallow. She looked at her mother. I didn't know it was this much. Eleanor finally spoke. We didn't want you to worry. Claire covered her mouth. Oh my God! I pulled out the next paper. The second mortgage agreement. Our house. I placed it beside the medical bills. We signed these papers last October. Mark leaned forward instinctively. You refinanced? Yes. At your age? Yes. He looked stunned. No one told us. I met his eyes. No one asked? The sentence landed harder than I'd intended. Because it wasn't cruel. It was true. Finally. I removed a single folded letter. Unlike everything else, this wasn't a financial document. It was written on hospital letterhead. I recognized it immediately. I'd read it dozens of times. Never once without feeling sick. I unfolded it carefully. This, I said, is from Eleanor's oncologist. My voice remained steady. But just barely. When we asked whether skipping treatments could save money, I paused. We didn't ask because we wanted to stop. I looked at Claire. We asked because we were afraid we'd have no choice. Claire's eyes widened. I read one sentence aloud. Reducing or delaying chemotherapy at this stage would significantly decrease the patient's probability of long-term remission. I folded the letter again. Very carefully. Then placed it on top of the pile. We chose debt. I looked at my wife. Because I wasn't ready to choose goodbye. Eleanor lowered her head. A single tear slipped onto the white tablecloth. Claire's shoulders began to shake. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Slowly. Like someone whose entire understanding of the past was rearranging itself piece by piece. She whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" I answered without hesitation. Because parents spend their whole lives trying to protect their children. I looked at the scattered papers covering the table. Even when those children are 47 years old. No one spoke. Not Mark. Not Eleanor. Not even the people watching from nearby tables. Because everyone understood something in that moment. This was no longer about money. It wasn't about medical bills. It wasn't even about cancer. It was about the unbearable distance that can grow between people who love each other. When gratitude quietly gives way to assumption. I looked once more into the envelope. Only one section remained. The most painful one of all. The printed screenshots. The words my daughter had never expected me to see. For months, I'd prayed I would never have to take them out. My hand hovered over them. Then, slowly, I lifted them free. The screenshots felt heavier than everything else in the envelope combined. Not because they weighed more. Because words have a way of outlasting money. Bank accounts can recover. Homes can be rebuilt. Medical debt can eventually be paid. But once someone discovers what you truly believed about them, that knowledge never completely disappears. I held the small stack of printed pages in my hand without speaking. Claire stared at them. Her face had already lost its color. She knew. She didn't know exactly what I was holding. But somewhere deep inside, she knew. "Dad?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "You don't have to." I looked at her gently. "I wish I didn't." For several seconds, I simply stood there. My heart wasn't telling me to embarrass my daughter. It was begging me to stop. Every instinct I had as a father screamed to protect her. Even now. Even after everything. That's what made the next few moments so difficult. Parents spend decades shielding their children from pain. No one teaches you what to do when the child becomes the source of it. I looked around the restaurant. People weren't staring with curiosity anymore. Their expressions had changed. There was sadness in their faces. Concern. Recognition. Many of them weren't watching strangers. They were remembering their own families. Their own regrets. Their own unfinished conversations. I took a slow breath. Then looked back at Claire. "I never went looking for these." She closed her eyes. "I know. You left your phone on our kitchen counter. I remember. It lit up. I know. I picked it up because I thought something might be wrong." Another pause. And then, my voice caught for the first time all evening. Something was. I held up the first page. "I only printed these because I was afraid one day I'd convince myself I imagined them." Claire covered her mouth. Tears were already running freely down her cheeks. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He reached toward her hand. She didn't take it. I read the first message. Quietly. Not dramatically. "Mom and Dad are becoming a real burden." The words floated across the table. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I looked at Claire. "Did you write that?" She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes. I did." There was no denial. No excuse. Only shame. I lowered the page and picked up another. "This medical stuff never ends." I looked at her. When I read those words, I swallowed. I didn't feel angry. I felt afraid. She looked confused through her tears. "Afraid?" "Because I wondered if your mother and I had somehow raised you to believe that loving people should only last as long as it's convenient." Claire shook her head violently. "No. No. I don't believe that. You wrote it." "I know. I know I did." She buried her face in her hands. "But that's not..." She couldn't finish. Brian's reply came next. I held up the page without reading it immediately. Your brother answered you. Claire nodded slowly. He did. I read his words. They're our parents. Silence. Then I read hers. We have to think about our own future too. Mark lowered his head. For the first time all evening, he spoke without confidence. Harold. I should have stepped in. I looked at him. You agreed with her. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Claire suddenly stood. Not in anger. In panic. She looked around the restaurant for the first time. She finally realized dozens of people had heard everything. Dad? Her voice cracked. Please! Not here. Those 3 words echoed through me. Not here. I almost smiled. Because I'd spent months hearing similar versions of that sentence. Not now. Not today. Not this week. We'll talk later. Another time. After the holidays. Once things calmed down. There was always another time. Until there wasn't. I answered softly. Where would you have preferred? My house. Between meetings? During one of the 10-minute phone calls when you were driving somewhere? Every question landed harder than the one before. She couldn't answer a single one. I looked toward Eleanor. She had been quietly crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just silent tears slipping down her face. Then something happened I never expected. She stood. Slowly. Painfully. Carlos instinctively stepped forward as if to help, but she smiled at him and gently shook her head. I've got it. She walked around the table. Not toward me. Toward Claire. Our daughter looked up. Completely broken. I'm sorry. The words poured out before Eleanor even reached her. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I became. She searched desperately for words. I became someone I don't even recognize. Eleanor cupped her face with trembling hands. The same hands that had once bandaged scraped knees. Braided little pigtails. Buttoned winter coats. Packed school lunches. I'm looking at you. She smiled through tears. And I still recognize you. Claire collapsed into her mother's arms. A sound escaped her that I had not heard since she was a child. Not crying. Not sobbing. Wailing. The kind of grief that comes when you finally see yourself clearly. Several people in the restaurant quietly looked away. Not because they weren't interested. Because the moment had become too intimate to witness. Mark remained seated. Motionless. His eyes followed Claire and Eleanor. Finally. He stood. Slowly. I owe all of you an apology. No one interrupted. He looked directly at me. When Claire's promotion started. He paused. I encouraged every one of them. I nodded. As you should have. But I also encouraged something else. He glanced toward Claire. I kept telling her that successful people protect their future. He laughed bitterly. I said it so many times that eventually I convinced myself compassion was bad financial planning. The words hung in the air. I wasn't trying to turn her against you. He looked at Eleanor. I just. His shoulders slumped. I stopped seeing people. I started seeing numbers. For the first time that evening. I believed him. Not because he deserved immediate forgiveness. Because regret has a sound. And I heard it. Claire slowly turned toward me. Her mascara had streaked down both cheeks. She looked nothing like the polished executive who'd walked into the restaurant an hour earlier. She looked like my little girl. Dad? She took one hesitant step forward. Then another. Until she stood only inches away. I can't undo what I said. No. I can't undo what I became. No. But if you'll let me. She wiped her face. I want to spend the rest of my life becoming the daughter you deserved. The restaurant remained completely silent. Every eye found me. Waiting. Would I forgive her? Would I reject her? Would 50 years end with one final fracture? I looked at the envelope. Then at my daughter. There was a time when I believed forgiveness was something you gave because someone asked. Age had taught me something different. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a road. Sometimes a very long one. I walked toward Claire. She immediately lowered her head, unable to meet my eyes. I gently lifted her chin. You know what hurts the most? She whispered. What? It wasn't reading those messages. She looked surprised. It was believing them. Fresh tears spilled down her face. I never stopped loving you. I know. I just. She struggled to breathe. I forgot how to show it. I nodded slowly. Then that's where we begin. Not where we end. Where we begin. I opened my arms. She stepped into them. And for the first time in years, my daughter hugged me the way she used to. Like she wasn't afraid to need her father. Like she wasn't checking the time. Like nowhere else in the world mattered. But even as I held her, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. A single apology could heal a heart. It could not rebuild trust. That work was only just beginning. People love stories that end with a single apology. A heartfelt hug. A few tears. Then everyone lives happily ever after. Real life doesn't work that way. Healing isn't one decision. It's 1,000 small ones. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply decides the past won't be allowed to write the future. When we walked out of Riverview Grill that night, nothing was magically fixed. Eleanor still had cancer. The medical bills were still waiting on our kitchen table. The second mortgage still existed. The envelope was still tucked beneath my arm. The only thing that had changed was that, for the first time in a long time, we had finally stopped pretending. Outside, the summer air felt strangely cool. The river flowed quietly beneath the bridge, reflecting the lights from the restaurants and shops along the waterfront. No one spoke as we walked toward the parking lot. Claire stayed close to her mother, one hand resting lightly on Eleanor's elbow. Not because Eleanor asked for help. Because Claire noticed she needed it. It was such a small gesture. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. For months, I'd watched my wife struggle to step off curbs, open heavy doors, and climb stairs while insisting she was fine. That night, our daughter saw it too. Sometimes love returns before words do. It begins with attention. Before we reached the cars, Claire stopped. Dad? I turned. I don't want tonight to be the last conversation. It won't be. I mean tomorrow. And the day after that. I want to help. I looked at her carefully. Help because you feel guilty? She hesitated. Maybe. I appreciated the honesty. Then don't. Her face fell. I don't understand. Guilt fades. I stepped closer. If you're going to stand beside your mother, do it because you love her. Not because you're trying to erase tonight. She nodded slowly. I do love her. I know. I just forgot how to prove it. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:42. Claire. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Old habits. Old wounds. Instead, I answered. Morning. Are you taking Mom to treatment today? Yes. What time? 9. I'll meet you there. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in the kitchen staring at the phone. Eleanor looked up from her tea. Who was it? Claire. A tiny smile appeared. She's coming? I think she is. Eleanor closed her eyes for just a second. Then whispered, Thank you? I wasn't sure whether she was thanking me. Or God. Maybe both. At 8:50 that morning, Claire was already waiting outside the oncology center. No business suit. No high heels. No designer handbag. She wore jeans, sneakers, and an old sweatshirt from the University of Michigan. The one we'd bought her freshman year. I'd almost forgotten it existed. She hurried over and hugged her mother. How are you feeling? Tired. I brought ginger candies. Eleanor laughed softly. Someone's been doing research. Claire smiled sheepishly. I stayed up half the night. Reading. Learning. Trying. The nurse called Eleanor back. Without saying a word, Claire took the chair beside her. The same chair I'd occupied every treatment for months. I started to follow. Then stopped. Maybe. This wasn't my seat today. I waited in the lobby instead. An hour later, Nurse Linda found me by the coffee machine. She smiled knowingly. You've got company today. I nodded. I noticed. Linda leaned against the counter. Your daughter? Yes. She's been asking questions. What kind? Good ones. About side effects. Nutrition. Fatigue. Things caregivers usually ask. I looked toward the treatment room. Linda smiled again. People can surprise you. Sometimes they just need to wake up. The changes didn't happen overnight. Some days Claire still slipped back into old habits. Her phone buzzed constantly. She occasionally glanced at work emails. She apologized every time. One afternoon, halfway through treatment, she stood up abruptly. I have to take this. Eleanor simply nodded. 5 minutes later, Claire returned. Then, she turned her phone completely off. I can call them back tomorrow. That tiny decision meant more than she probably realized. For years, work had always come first. For one afternoon, it didn't. Mark changed too, though in a quieter way. He never tried to make a grand speech again. He simply started showing up. The first Saturday after the anniversary dinner, I walked outside and found him standing in my driveway beside an aging toolbox. You busy? I looked at him. I usually am. He smiled awkwardly. I noticed your porch railing's loose. I've been meaning to fix it. I know. I brought tools. I couldn't help smiling. I've got tools. I figured. He looked embarrassed. I just wasn't sure you'd want mine. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then I opened the garage. Come on. We spent the next 4 hours replacing boards, tightening bolts, and repainting the railing. Mostly in silence. It reminded me of working beside my own father. Men sometimes speak best with their hands. Around lunchtime, Mark finally broke the silence. I owe you something. I kept sanding. Already apologized. Not enough. He leaned against the ladder. My father died when I was 21. I stopped working. You never told me that. I don't talk about him much. What happened? Heart attack. He stared out toward the street. I was building my career. I kept postponing visits. Always another promotion. Another project. Another flight. His voice grew quieter. I missed his last birthday. I looked at him. The next time I saw him. He couldn't finish. The rest didn't need words. After a long silence, he spoke again. When Claire started talking about boundaries, I didn't realize. He swallowed hard. I was repeating the same mistakes. Not the same circumstances. The same priorities. That was the first time I truly understood him. He wasn't heartless. He was haunted. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Claire invited us to dinner. Not at a restaurant. At her house. I want to cook. When we arrived, I immediately noticed something missing. The contractors. The renovation brochures. The endless conversations about upgrades. Instead, the kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and fresh rosemary. Emma was setting the table. Noah was carrying drinks. Grandma! Emma rushed over. I made dessert. You did? Don't get excited. Noah grinned. It might still be dangerous. Everyone laughed. For the first time in months, the house sounded like a family again. After dinner, while the grandchildren cleared dishes, Claire quietly handed me a folder. What's this? Open it. Inside was a stack of papers. The title caught my eye immediately. Boat sale agreement. I looked up. You sold it? She nodded. The lake house membership too. And? She slid another paper forward. Cancelled. Country club membership. Luxury gym. Streaming services. Several expensive subscriptions. Mark smiled. We realized we were paying for things we barely used. Claire added quietly. We've been confusing comfort with happiness. I looked through the papers again. Then found one final document. A cashier's check. $25,000. I immediately pushed it back toward her. No. She frowned. Why? You need your savings. She shook her head. We need our parents. Neither of us moved. Finally, Eleanor reached over and rested her hand on mine. Take it. I looked at her. We're not accepting charity. She smiled. It's not charity. It's family. I slowly accepted the check. Not because the money erased the past. Because refusing it would have denied Claire the chance to become the daughter she was trying so hard to be again. The following months settled into a new rhythm. Claire drove Eleanor to treatment every Tuesday. Mark handled repairs around our house before I even noticed they needed doing. Brian flew in from Arizona twice, refusing to let distance become another excuse. The grandchildren visited almost every weekend. Some days were still hard. Some scans brought frightening news. Some nights Eleanor barely slept because of the pain. But no one faced those days alone anymore. For the first time since the diagnosis, hope no longer rested on just two aging shoulders. It belonged to the whole family. Then, late one autumn afternoon, our oncologist walked into the exam room holding a folder. He wasn't smiling. At least, not yet. He looked at Eleanor. Then at all four of us gathered around her. And finally, a slow smile spread across his face. I've been looking forward to this appointment. My heart stopped. Because sometimes, the best news begins exactly the same way as the worst. With a doctor carrying a folder. For a split second, no one in the room breathed. I'd spent so many months studying doctors' faces that I'd forgotten how to read anything else. A serious expression. A thick folder. A long pause. Those things had always meant bad news. Dr. Patel looked around the room, taking his time. Eleanor sat beside me with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Claire stood behind her mother's chair, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. Mark leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, trying to hide how nervous he was. Brian had flown in from Arizona the night before without telling anyone except me. He wanted to surprise his mother. He also didn't want her facing another scan without the whole family beside her. The grandchildren had stayed in the waiting room with coloring books and vending machine snacks, blissfully unaware that the next few words might become one of the defining memories of their lives. Dr. Patel finally opened the folder. He looked directly at Eleanor. I've reviewed every scan. Another pause. Twice. No one spoke. The tumors have continued to shrink. I felt Eleanor's fingers tighten around mine. The latest imaging shows. He smiled. No evidence of active disease. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood him. No evidence. The words echoed inside my head. Not cured. Not guaranteed. But no evidence. Hope. Real hope. Eleanor covered her mouth. Claire burst into tears before anyone else moved. Brian lowered his head. Mark quietly wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, pretending no one noticed. I didn't even realize I was crying until Eleanor reached up and brushed tears from my face with her thumb. Dr. Patel laughed softly. I've delivered this news hundreds of times. He shook his head. It never gets old. That afternoon, we didn't go home immediately. Instead, Eleanor asked me to drive. Where? She smiled. You'll know. 20 minutes later, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of Riverview Grill. The same restaurant. The same view. The same river. For a moment I couldn't move. The memories came rushing back. The white tablecloth. The envelope. The silence. The tears. Eleanor touched my arm. Come on. Carlos recognized us the moment we walked through the door. His face lit up. Mr. Whitaker. Mrs. Whitaker. He hurried over. I've wondered about you too, Eleanor smiled. I'm still here. His eyes became glassy. I can see that. He stepped away for a second. When he returned, he was holding 2 menus. I've already told the manager. What? He grinned. Tonight. Dessert's on us again. We laughed. Not because of the dessert. Because kindness has a way of coming back when you least expect it. Claire and Mark arrived a few minutes later. This time, they were early. Brian walked in behind them carrying Emma and Noah, who immediately ran toward their grandmother. No expensive wine appeared on the table. No phones rested beside anyone's plate. In fact, before anyone even ordered, Mark reached into his pocket, switched off his phone completely, and placed it face down in the center of the table. Claire smiled. I'll follow your lead. One by one. Every phone disappeared. No buzzing. No notifications. No interruptions. Just people. It felt strangely revolutionary. Dinner wasn't remarkable because of what we ate. It was remarkable because nobody was trying to be anywhere else. Emma talked about college applications. Noah described his baseball season in exhausting detail. Brian told embarrassing stories about Claire as a teenager. Claire retaliated by telling the grandchildren how their uncle once tried to microwave a frozen pizza without removing the cardboard. Even Mark laughed until he nearly spilled his iced tea. At one point, I simply stopped talking. I looked around the table. Listened. Watched. This was what we'd almost lost. Not a house. Not money. Not pride. Each other. Halfway through dinner, Claire quietly reached into her purse. I noticed immediately. She looked nervous. Dad? She slid something across the table. It was another envelope. Smaller than mine had been. What is it? I've been carrying this for months. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper. The handwriting looked instantly familiar. Crooked. Childlike. I unfolded it. Then smiled. It was the original school assignment I'd found while sorting through the basement. The one titled, My Hero. Claire looked down. I went through old boxes after that night. I found the original. She swallowed hard. I read it again. Her voice cracked. I cried for almost an hour. I looked back at the paper. The last sentence still read. When my mom and dad are old, I'm going to take care of them because heroes shouldn't have to work forever. Claire wiped away another tear. I broke that promise. I folded the paper carefully. No. She looked confused. You forgot it. There's a difference. She nodded slowly. I won't forget again. After dinner, the grandchildren begged to walk along the river. The adults followed behind at a slower pace. The evening air carried the scent of water and freshly cut grass. Lights reflected across the surface of the river exactly as they had on our anniversary. We reached the overlook where Eleanor and I had stood countless times over the years. She leaned gently against the railing. I used to think love meant protecting people from pain. She looked at me. I was wrong. How so? It also means trusting them enough to tell them the truth. Claire lowered her eyes. I'm grateful you finally did. So am I. A few weeks later, I found the manila envelope while cleaning my workshop. It was still exactly where I'd left it after that night. I carried it out onto the back porch. The maple tree towered overhead, its leaves painted gold by late autumn. I opened the envelope one final time. College receipts. Loan papers. Medical bills. Hospital letters. Screenshots. Memories. Every page represented something we'd survived. Not because life had been fair. Because love had refused to quit. I sat there for a long time. Then I did something I never imagined I'd do. One by one, I fed every document into the old paper shredder in the corner of the garage. Not because those years no longer mattered. They always would. But because they had finished their work. The envelope had never been about proving Claire wrong. It had been about helping her remember who she was. Now she did. When the last sheet disappeared into the shredder, I folded the empty envelope once, then twice, and tossed it into the recycling bin. I stood there watching the maple tree sway in the breeze. The same tree we planted the year Claire was born. Its roots had weathered storms. Its branches had lost leaves every autumn. Yet every spring, without fail, it bloomed again. Families, I realized, aren't all that different. Sometimes they bend. Sometimes they crack. Sometimes they spend years growing in the wrong direction. But when their roots are deep enough, love can still find its way back. If there's one thing these 50 years taught me, it's this. Children don't stop needing their parents when they grow up. And parents never stop needing their children. Not because of money. Not because of obligation. Because life was never meant to be carried alone. If you're fortunate enough to still have the people who loved you before you became successful, before you made mistakes, before the world taught you to measure everything in dollars and deadlines, call them. Visit them. Sit at the table a little longer. Ask one more question. Listen to one more story. The greatest inheritance a family can leave behind isn't a house, a bank account, or an investment portfolio. It's the certainty that, when life becomes unbearably heavy, no one has to carry it alone. And as Eleanor reached for my hand while we watched the river flow beneath the evening sky, I realized something that no doctor, no bank statement, and no envelope could ever measure. After 50 years of marriage, the greatest anniversary gift we received wasn't another year together. It was getting our family back. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If your mother or father called you tonight, would you answer? Life has a way of making us believe we'll always have another birthday, another holiday, another chance to say, I love you. But the truth is, none of us knows how many chances we have left. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Pick up the phone. Send that text. Knock on that door. One small act of love today could become the memory your family treasures forever. Now I'd love to hear from you. If you were sitting at that anniversary table, what would you have done? And have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed your relationship with someone you love? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone, and your words might help someone else who's going through the same struggle. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still has time to make things right with the people they love. Remember this. Success fades. Money comes and goes. But the people who loved you before you had anything are irreplaceable. Take care of them while you still can. I'll see you in the next story.